Okay, class, so welcome to chapter 16. Going forward, what you'll see me doing is that I will actually go through some problems with you because what I'm finding is that students are reading the chapters generally, and that's you when I say students, of course, generally understanding the information in the chapters. But then when it gets to the problems and applying that information to the problems and knowing where to start, I find that that's where students are struggling. So going forward, I'll leave it up to you to read the chapters, and then I'll walk you through how to solve a couple of the problems. For chapter 16, we're going to do one of the homework problems. And we're going to do a problem that's going to be similar to what you see on the exam. So let's start with exercise 1612. If you haven't noticed by now, all the homework problems can be found at the back of the chapter in your textbook. Okay. So we'll start with exercise 1612. Again, this is one of your homework problems. And it says weighted average cost per equivalent unit, costs assigned to products. A company uses the weighted average method of process costing. Information for the company's first production process follows. All direct materials are added at the beginning of the process. That's important. And I'll point it out to you later why that's important. And then it says conversion costs are added uniformly throughout the process. And it gives you a bunch of information here on your direct materials, your conversion, it gives you some cost information, and then it asks you to do three things. So we're going to walk through those three things. I've prepared a preliminary Excel document, which is where I will um, go through these problems with you. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. All right, so the first part of the question, and I'm going to be looking down at my phone because so I'm not toggling back and forth on the screen. I took a picture of the question so that I can refer to it as we walk through it. So the first part of the question says compute the equivalent units of production for both direct materials and conversion costs. So let's start with that. Um, so completed, we're going to start with our completed and transferred out. All right. Completed and transferred out basically means that we started the process of producing whatever those units are. Let's say it's milk, and we completed processing that milk in this particular department, and now we sent it to another department. So let's say now we sent it to the packaging department or the bottling department. All right. But within this specific department, we've completed the production of the milk. All right. Which means that we've added direct materials and we've incurred some conversion costs. So if we look at the question, it tells us that completed and transferred out, the number of units were 23,000. And the question gives us this number, all right? And then it also tells us that all of the materials, remember I told you this is important, all of the materials are added at the beginning of the process. So that means 100% of direct materials have already been added at the beginning of the production of whatever they're making at this company. So we're going to put 100% here for our percent complete under direct materials. And so then we get 23,000 times 100% gives us our equivalent units of production, which would be 23,000. Okay. For our conversion costs, remember, these are completed. Within this particular department, whatever they're making has been completed. So that means that all of our conversion costs have also been added in this department. So for completed and transferred out conversion, we're going to put 100% as well. And so 100% times 23,000 units gives us our equivalent units of production of 23,000. So that's the first part of this question. Now we're going to look at our ending work in process. So our ending work in process means that we started producing some units, but we didn't finish all of them. So these are the ones that are in the department and have not been finished yet. All right. If we look at the question, it says that there were 7,000 units in our ending work in process. All right. Now remember, The question says all of the direct materials are added at the beginning. So even though at the end, these units have not been completed, because all of the direct materials are added at the beginning, 100% of our direct materials were added into these ending work in process items. So I'm going to put 100% here under direct materials. So 7,000 times 100% leaves me with 7,000 equivalent units of production. For conversion, however, if I look at the information it gave me in the question, it says 40% of conversion costs were applied to ending work in process. I'm going to put 40% here. And then when I multiply 7,000 by 40%, I'm going to get 2,800. Okay. So then my total would be 30,000 units here. Under my direct materials, it will also be 30,000. And under my conversion, it'll be 25,800. And that is part A of the question. Let's move to part B. Part B says, compute the cost per equivalent unit for both direct materials and conversion. So once again, we're going to look at the question. The question gives us the cost. We start with our beginning work in process. So our cost of beginning work in process, the direct materials, the question says is 45,000. And our conversion, the question says is 56,320. All right. The question gives us this information. Now I'm going to add my costs added during the period. Costs added this period. All right. If I look at the question again, it tells me for direct materials, the cost added for direct materials was 375,000, and the cost added for conversion cost was 341,000. So then this gives me my total cost. So I'm just going to, for direct materials, add these two numbers, and I should get 420,000. And for conversion cost, I'm going to add these two numbers, and I should get 397,320. Now I'm going to divide this by my equivalent units of production, which I calculated in part A. So part A, for direct materials, my equivalent units were 30,000. So I'm going to put 30,000 here. And for conversion costs, I calculated 25,800. So I'm going to put 25,800 here. All right. And when I divide these numbers, so equals this divided by this number, I should get $14. And then this divided by this number, I should get $15.40. And that is part B. The last part, which is part C now, says assign cost to the department's output, specifically to the units transferred out and to the units in ending work in process inventory. All right. So we're going to first start with our completed and transferred out. All right. And then I'm going to do my direct and my conversion. All right. So under my completed and transferred out, I need to figure out what my equivalent units of production are. So if I go back to tab 1, I see for my completed and transferred out, my equivalent units for direct materials is 23,000. So I'm going to put that 23,000 right here. And then I got my cost per equivalent unit, which I calculated in part B, was $14. I'm going to put 14 here. And then I'm going to multiply these two. And that's going to give me my cost for the direct materials, 322,000. For my conversion costs, I need to get my equivalent units of production. So I'm going to go back to part A, and I see that my equivalent units of production for conversion completed and transferred out was 23,000. So I'm going to put 23,000 here as well. Then I know my cost per equivalent unit, which I calculated in B, was $15.40. So I'm going to put 15.40 here. And then I'm going to multiply those two numbers. And I should get 354,200. And that gives me my total completed and transferred out. So I'm going to add these two numbers together. And that gives me my total. Now I need to come to calculate for my ending work in process. And again, I'm going to do it for my direct materials and my conversion. And I'm going to put materials up here. All right. So for my ending work in process, I need my equivalent units of production. I'm going to go back to part A. My ending work in process for direct materials, the equivalent units of production were 7,000. So I'm going to put 7,000 here. I know my cost per unit is $14. And I'm going to multiply those two numbers. So this multiplied by this. All right. And I should get $98,000. And then my conversion, we'll go back to part A. My conversion, I calculated 2,800 equivalent units of production. I'm going to put 2,800 here. I know that my cost is $15.40, which I calculated in part B. I'm going to multiply these two numbers. And that's going to give me my cost for conversion. And I think I put these numbers a little too high, so I'm going to move them down a little bit. There we go. So then I get my total and then work in process. I add these two numbers together, and that gives me my total. And then lastly, I want my total costs accounted for. I'm going to add my total completed and transferred out to my total ending work in process, and I should get 817,320. And that's how you solve that problem. Okay. Now I'm going to provide the spreadsheet. I'll have the spreadsheet saved. If it's too small or if you want the spreadsheet, reach out to me and I'm happy to email it to you. Let's move on to one more similar problem. And again, this is going to be similar to what you see on the exam. In the back of your chapter, it's going to be problem 16-1A. So let's go. Pull back up my spreadsheet. So 16-1A says, Victory Company uses weighted average process costing. The company has two production processes. Conversion cost is added evenly throughout each process. Direct materials are added at the beginning of the process. And then it gives you some additional information, and it tells us to do the same three things. Compute the equivalent units of production for both direct materials and conversion cost. So let's start with our completed and transferred out. My units, if I look at the question, it tells me units completed and transferred out, 700,000. All right. So for direct materials, it's going to be 100%. So my equivalent units of production would be 700,000. For my conversion cost, because these have been completed, it's also going to be 100%. So my equivalent units of production will be 700,000. And now for my ending work in process, if I look at the question, it tells me it's 180,000 units. So the question tells me it's been 100% complete for direct materials. So that's 180. And then for conversion, it tells me that it's 30% complete. So that's going to be 180 times 30%, which is 54,000 units. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to get my total. So I'm add these two numbers. I'm going to add these two numbers. And then I'm going to add these two numbers. And those are my equivalent units of production. In part B now, I want to calculate my cost per equivalent unit of production. So now I'm going to start with my cost of beginning work in process. For direct materials, it tells me it's 420. And for my conversion, it tells me it's 139. Then I'm going to have my costs added this period. For direct materials, it tells me it's 2,220,000 for direct materials. And for conversion, it tells me it's 3,254,000. Right? So this gives me my total cost. I'm going to add these, this, and this. Then I'm going to add these, this, plus this. Right? Now I'm going to divide this by my equivalent units of production. And if I go back to part A, I see that for direct materials, my equivalent units of production is 880,000. So I'm going to put 880 here. And for my conversion cost, it's 754,000. So I'm going to put 754,000 here. And then I'm going to, my costs per equivalent unit of production, I'm going to divide these two numbers. So the 2640 divided by the 880, and that gives me $3. Then I'm going to divide my 3,393,000 by 754,000 equivalent units, and that gives me 450. And if you look at the question, there's a checkpoint, and it says the conversion cost per equivalent unit is $4.50. So you see that we did it correctly. The last part that we're going to move on to is part C, which says assign cost to the department's output, specifically to the units transferred out into the units and in work in process inventory. So we're going to start again with our completed and transferred out. We'll have direct materials. I'm going to have my conversion. Okay. So if I go back to part A, my equivalent units of production for completed and transferred out pertaining to direct materials, I see that that is 700,000. So I'm going to put my 700,000 here. And my cost per equivalent unit, I know is $3. I'm going to put $3 here. Now I'm going to multiply those two numbers. And that gives me 2.1 million. For my conversion, my equivalent units of production, go back to part A, $700,000. So sorry, 700,000 units for completed and transferred out pertaining to conversion. So I'm going to put 700,000 here. And I know that my cost per equivalent unit is $4.50. I'm going to put 450 here. And then I multiply these two numbers. And that gives me 3.15 million. All right. So my total completed and transferred out. I'm going to add these two numbers. And that's my total. Now I'm going to do my ending work in process. I'm going to have my direct materials again. I'm going to have my conversion. So my equivalent units of production, ending work in process, direct materials, I'm going to go back to part A. That is 180,000. So I'm going to put 180 here. I know my cost is $3. And I'm going to multiply those two numbers. and that gives me 540,000. My conversion now, so my equivalent units of production and in work in process conversion, go back to part A, and I see it's 54,000. So I'm going to put 54,000 here. I know my cost is 450. I'm going to multiply those two numbers. And that gives me 243,000. So my total and then work in process, add these two numbers together, $783,000. So my total cost accounted for, I'm going to add together my completed and transferred out plus my end in work in process. And I get 6,033,000. And that is how you do this problem. If you have any questions or you need any help doing any of the other problems, please feel free to reach out and I'm happy to help you. Also, please leverage the tutor that the business department offers. Thank you.